So, one of the biggest problems that I've seen in recent years is the pervasive problem of bad citations or citing things which aren't necessarily real. So, what do I mean by real? So, the point of a citation in science, in backing up your arguments, in any sort of persuasive communication, the whole point of a citation is to lend credibility to your research through effectively pointing to evidence that other people have figured out. So you have to undertake the task of figuring out the quality of this evidence. There is a massive problem right now with sloppy thinking, and the sloppy thinking is primarily, I would say, caused by people doing a few things with their cited sources. One, not reading or understanding the citation. Citing resources that you find on the internet is actually a valid way to convince people of your point and to get closer to whatever objective truth you might be trying to attain. One of the big problems with doing that, though, is that people find sources that support their argument without understanding the sources. I had a friend do this to me recently. We were talking about the concept of sex before marriage, and this person, who will go unnamed, cited a gender studies article because it was one of the only articles that supported his claim. Now, the problem with this article is it didn't define terms. It used a bunch of vagaries. It had very, very little in the way of statistical causation. It was basically just a list of correlations saying that people who have more sexual partners before marriage are the same people who are likely to be depressed. And I don't know if you can see the flaws in using an argument like that, but firstly, there's no direct link between the correlation and the of depression and multiple life partners and the cause. So, like, for instance, just because, like, there could be a million different causes for that. It doesn't specify the direct causal link between the piece of evidence and the correlation. Now, the fact that that is in a scientific journal is troubling by itself, but aside from that, and it probably has to do with the overeducation of Americans and the world in general, because we've treated college like a commodity, much like we've treated cars. But so, okay, that's one way you can get a citation wrong, is citing sources which you don't understand, which run the risk of being incorrect, and then perpetuating a falsehood instead of understanding the nature of the peer-reviewed article that you're citing, and then proceeding to actually understand why the evidence is good evidence. Okay. That's the hardest one to explain. The second and third problems with people's citation habits are actually relatively simple to explain. Citing journal, not necessarily peer-reviewed journal articles, not scientific like documentation, but citation of anecdotal news sources. Like, okay, so the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, Fox News. These are not attempts to describe objective reality. What they are is a go-between between the general public and the scientific community who's trying to, at least in theory, approach the concept of reality objectively and understand it in a way that it can be manipulated. So what these people do, what the news's primary job, at least when it comes to reporting on science and politics and such, is they take a more objective view, given to them by people who actually, study this stuff, and then they turn it into an anecdote so that a dumb person, no offense, could understand it. Because I don't know how many people have ever actually looked at peer-reviewed papers, but they're pretty dense. If you don't know what you're looking at, you're not going to be able to understand it, generally speaking, and some people just aren't going to be able to understand that level of abstraction. So what the news does is it takes it and it turns it into a story, so that people can understand. Now, the problem with that is that story has no bearing on actual reality. It's just a cool story, so you can tell your friends about it. When they can't necessarily read, they don't know the language of trying to calculate objective reality. The final, citing papers you don't read or understand, citing anecdotes, and citing entire institutions or rationality itself, which is a stupid citation. So this, you could also lump citation of age, citation of experience, personal experience. None of these things matter at all. At best, they are a overgeneralization. At worst, they're an outright lie. So if you're, for instance, I see this a lot, even in the media. I see people citing the science says this. Okay, the biggest myth of our time is that there is scientific consensus that you can quote. Scientists don't like each other. They disagree constantly on the most trivial shit. This idea that there's a higher authority who knows is a hangover from religious thinking. Maybe it's necessary, but don't try to use it to clarify objective reality. It doesn't move any debates further. This idea of, the science says this, all rational people say this. No, it's just not productive. There's no scientific consensus on anything. People who say they aren't typically contributors to the scientific method. If they are contributors to the scientific practice and they, say something like, well, scientists agree, 9 out of 10 scientists agree, then at that moment they're deviating from the honest pursuit of objective reality. So don't be that guy. So fix your citations. Make sure that you're citing objectively verifiable information. And if you don't have any objectively verifiable information, or you fail to know what objectively verifiable information looks like, you don't have to have an opinion on something complicated. You should just live your life. You shouldn't be trying to convince people of things over the internet. If you're going to quote the science, if you're going to quote authority, if you're going to cite age, if you're going to cite a personal anecdote, if you're going to cite a news article, a story, a cool story, any of that shit, you don't have to have an opinion. It's okay to not have an opinion on complex shit. Just live your life. You don't have to shape public discourse. You're not contributing anything.